introduction to jQuery. Just kind of look at these topics. You know, the dollar function, the jQuery function that we use, is how we interact with the library. And then using CSS selectors inside of jQuery, manipulating some DOM elements, so how callbacks work in jQuery, a little iteration, and a little bit of events. And then, you know, we'll walk through a little bit of demo, and then I have like a small step through, kind of a very small, very minimal application. And then after that, a little bit of a plugin just to show not really how to author a plugin, but how to use one. Because I'm thinking that that's something, if you're kind of getting started with jQuery, one of the most important things for you is going to be just how to go out and evaluate a plugin and download it and be able to use it competently, confidently. You know, it seems like that's pretty important in jQuery, is getting those custom plugins. Things I'm leaving out, I'm sure I'm leaving out a whole lot more, but these were things I considered that I know I'm leaving out. I'm not going to touch on Ajax or actually authoring plugins or more advanced events topics. Those things will be in future demonstrations. So, everybody knows where to get jQuery? Oh, at jQuery.com. Download it right there. Generally go with the minified version. Look at the regular version, a little bit of the code. Here's our main, here's like the beginning of it, the jQuery function. Next place that you want to look, after you download jQuery and include it in your project, is have a look at the API, jQuery's API. This your main resource for what's available to you, different things you can do. So, let's see. Go right into. Here's my HTML page. It's just for like little. Little bit of live stuff here.
Well, hold on. Is everyone familiar with exactly what you just did to get that toolbar up there?
I'd like to see it for JavaScript, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you're going to have to show like all that kind of stuff. You can't take the minutes and things.
Okay.
I know how to get to it, but then I don't know after
Cool.
that.
Okay. So here is my very simple HTML page that we're going to do some stuff to using jQuery. I'm sure everybody knows, right? So after you download jQuery, you include it in a script tag in your project, and you make sure that all the rest of your files that are dependent upon jQuery are included after that. So so that you've got a function before you start trying to use it. Okay, so what I'm going to use to demonstrate this is the web developer tools. This is in Google Chrome. You've got pretty much the same thing in Firefox. Firefox has a couple of things that Google doesn't. But okay, so I usually just hit F12. I don't know how you do it, how other people get to the inspector. That gets you to the inspector.
You can do it from the menu.
Or right click. That part I know.
Okay.
If you go to tools.
Right click.
Yeah, right click and
Oh, yeah,
inspect
one of the
and
options.
Control Shift I.
Which one is it?
Control
Just
Shift.
one?
Control Shift I.
Oh,
Yeah.
Control Shift I.
Yeah.
So Control Shift I does it too.
I didn't know.
I didn't know that. F12 on a Windows box and a Linux box does it pretty easily. I don't know. I think I was on Mac the other day, didn't I?
It's command and whatever
It's
next to
different.
command.
Okay. Okay. So, and then our console. So here's all we have. We have like this really simple I got not much going here. Made sure to have my character set, and that's about it. A little bit of style. You can see the style that I have applied on these divs. So I have my div. All the divs are getting their style right now, pretty much just from this div declaration. And then I have a class called my class that's changing the width of a couple of them. And then here's the IDs for each one of my divs, right? So in CSS, right, we can adjust the style for an element in these different ways. You know, we get a hold of it just by its element name, or we can get a hold of it by a class name, or multiple class names, or we can get a hold of it by an ID, right? And these are different ways that we attach some style declarations to HTML elements. So the great thing that JQuery introduced into JavaScript is that now we can get a hold of HTML elements the same way in JavaScript. And so if you know CSS, you know how to write a style sheet, you're going to know how to manipulate the DOM using JQuery. So here's my divs. Let's see. I'm going to console log some stuff here because that's the easiest way the quickest way to see things. Console log the $. Yep, that's a function. Can you guys? It's a little low, isn't it? It's not cut off that low. My screen. Better. Console log. This $sign, I don't know if everybody is totally familiar with it. The $sign is just a shorthand. What we're actually working with is the JQuery function. And so if we console log that the $sign equals JQuery, it's true. Because that's all it is, it's just a little shorthand. So all throughout JQuery, every file you look in, it's going to be $everything, $this, $that, and that's all it is. It's just our wrapper function, our main jQuery function, and that's what gives us access to all the power. So let's see. Let's go find one of our divs here. We'll actually run our $. Function now. We'll run it looking for, how about looking for a div? Anything that's a div, right? We get back our JQuery object here. And in our JQuery object, the first, let me see if I can get this to scroll down a little better. The first three properties here of our jQuery object is our div1, right? Or div2. Can everyone see that highlighting up there? Just like if we were doing a CSS inspection. So that gave us our collection of our divs. You know, if we wanted a different collection, you know, we could go try to find the ones with my class, right? So now what we're going to get is just those two that have our class, right? Instead of all of them. So that works for any CSS selector that you know. Is this all? Am I moving fast enough? Slow enough? Is this all making sense? Everybody? Is this cool? Okay. So let's do something to it. Let's do something to one of these things. Let's say that that my class is now. What do we want? Let's change the CSS. So we'll use a CSS function that JQuery provides. So all we did here is we selected it, and then we're just going to use this function right on the end of there. because it's going to return us our jQuery object, and then we can call functions on that object. So we'll change our background color to red. Okay. So there goes. So we change those. We can take. We can get a little trickier. We can do. Let's see. Take our ID 1. Change its width to 400 maybe. And then let's do the same thing, but let's change its width to 300. And then let's do something else with it. Let's change its height to 1. It's already 100, I think, isn't it? Let's change its height to 200. And then let's change some CSS properties as well. Let's change background. Background color is an easy one all the time. Let's see if this works. There we go. So if we look back up here at this last command I put in the console, what we did right here is we're using a pattern called method chaining, and this makes jQuery very handy. What happens is, just like our original jQuery selector of jQuery object, run the function, we're going to go find an element with the ID 1, and then that returns a jQuery object with that element in it. So then we're going to call our width function. Now the width function returns our jQuery object back to us after it runs. So then we're going to call the height function on that. That returns our same jQuery object back to us. Then we're going to call a CSS function on that and change some CSS on there. So that's it makes it really convenient to go get an element and just think of all the things you want to do right now and go ahead and execute all those things in a single line of code. It gets trickier than that, but that's the basic of method chaining. Let's see. Is everybody up to speed on that? I think I covered. It's easy. DOM manipulation made easy. CSS selectors, and what about? Let's pass something a callback function. We could do iteration and callback function at the same time here. We'll look for our div. So that's our basic selector. We're just going to get every div. The way you iterate through the collection in jQuery is just through the each function. They make it really, really easy. It's just called each, not for each or each one. It's just each. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass our each function an anonymous callback function. So you'll see it's just the JavaScript syntax for a function, right? And whatever we do, this is console. Sorry, I couldn't do that. I'll have to do it all inline. Whatever we do in this space, right, is what's going to happen to each element that's in our collection. So we're going to use, let's see, there's one more concept in here. Is everybody's familiar with the this keyword from native JavaScript? That it exists. I'm not sure. I mean, it's pretty complicated.
You're gonna have to explain that.
This.
Yeah. If it's a beginner jQuery, they don't know. A lot of people don't know what the this keyword is and how it's used. You have to explain it. That's hard to explain.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
really
hard
hard
to
to
explain.
explain. Because you got to go into scope and all sorts of crazy stuff.
The basic thing is this gives you a handle on the object that you're currently working in. Now, how that context changes, it gets really complicated really fast of what this references to. But that's the basic idea. Is that it just gives you a handle to the current object you're working with. So in JQuery, whenever we pass our callback function to one of our JQuery functions, such as each, we get this. That's going to be like in each. They keep the context correct for us. They handle a lot of that stuff for us, so we don't have to worry about anything. And so we can just here for this one, let's just do console log this. So that's all we're doing inside it. So we should see this should iterate. This is first going to iterate through our collection of divs. Should be all 3 divs, and then it's just going to console log that, right? Each one of those. So here we go. So here's where we executed. We got our logged out, our 1, 2, and 3. And I'm not sure the last.
It returns the jQuery object.
Because it returns J, but did it? Okay. I'm just surprised that logged it. I didn't realize it would.
Yeah, it was doing it the whole time you were doing it.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's see. Let's do something. Do one more in here, and then I'll get up to that little application that I had set up. So here, let's actually do something to this. One thing is that actually, let me show that again so we can see that those what it actually returned is our. See, look, this is not. See, it didn't return. These aren't the jQuery objects right here that it logged out from inside of our callback, because this just references the element without the wrapper, without the jQuery wrapper. So we have to provide that if we want it. So when we're gonna do something with each one of those elements, we'll go ahead and wrap each one, wrap this inside of the jQuery function. So now we have access to all of jQuery's goodness. So again, kind of whatever, just change something. Let's go width 50, height 50. Change our background color again. Okay, so just like we logged all of them out to the console before, now we just actually manipulated each element from our callback that we passed to each, to the iteration. Okay, so I'm going to go over to JS bin where I've set up a few, kind of a step through. We're going to go kind of quick through it. So I'll show you what where we're starting from. First, this is just a basic HTML page. You see down here it doesn't really do anything. Again, I just logged console logged some stuff out, and that's about it.
Is JSP like a run live page?
Yeah, it is. So there's these nothing does anything yet. I'll show you real quick where we're headed, because that may make it maybe seem a little more fun in the beginning. This is where we're headed. Is we have some divs that we put on our page, and we have some actions from some form elements here, and and then we can do stuff like do a little thing like. So we're making them visible, and then we're making them draggable. So that's what we're going to build. Okay, so the second step after I had my basic HTML. Let me see. Let me show you this with this little screen. It might work better just do one at a time here. So here's my basic page again. You can see all my CSS. You You can see my classes, red, blue, and green, that I'm gonna put on my divs. You can see each div is 200 by 200. You can see there's my form with some labels and inputs. My form doesn't have any action associated with it. It's just there to contain my inputs. I found out actually that when I was putting checked on my inputs, if they weren't in a form, they wouldn't be checked initially. So I put them in a form. So that's the only reason it's there. Okay, so here's a step I've added on the second one. I'm using JQuery's event function to attach some event listeners to the form elements, to the inputs, so that when we do something with those inputs, well, it happens, right?
On change.
So this is jQuery's new, fairly new, event registrar, the event handler, the on function. They used to have a whole bunch. This replaces like live and bind, and you'll see those out there, but on is what they prefer. It implements a promises pattern that jQuery is headed to, and it makes it easier to do. Incidentally, if we want to take an event off of an element, then we use off. So that's pretty nice, and it gives you can have really granular control when you're attaching listeners, and say like, so if you add if you add a whole bunch of functions to on change, you can go in and on off if you can remove them one at a time, or you can remove them all at once, depending what you need. So I think it's really nice just because I don't have to remember when to use bind and unbind and live and whatever, So on this page, let's see.
Is change your chosen syntax? Like you could put anything there?
You can. It's your. It's whatever can be emitted by your element, I guess. So change. I'm using change because this is for a checkbox,
Okay.
and so I'm going to check it for change. You know what I mean? Rather than like.
Or mouse over.
Or mouse over and stuff. Yeah, it's it's kind
The
of signal
event.
good events.
All right.
Like that maybe you might have said like, and way back when you might have said on changer, right, or on click and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Like way back when we were putting them right in the HTML.
Yeah.
So you'll see. So I have the on change on. What's wrong with JS? If this JS bin doesn't go that great, I have just copies as well. So. Let's see, so it's not going out to this console. Let's go try. Let's see what happens with this one. Oh, we have a whole lot of problems here. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, let's see if this one. See if that's okay. At least it worked. It's the wrong file. File. And it worked. Our event fired on our show red element. In their Chrome, you can just see it firing several more times. And on change for show blue, I just logged out. If everybody can see that here, your callback for your event. This is our anonymous callback function, just like that I passed on the iterator on each. So this is where everything's going to happen that I want to happen. This is actually the function I'm registering to fire when that event occurs. JQuery is really nice about passing our event. This is actually our event object right here. And so, let's see.
You've got a VE 2 lines down. It's just a typo in your file.
There it is.
2 lines, yeah, you just,
Oh,
yeah. That's what it's
thank
showing
you.
up.
So what we see here, this is actually the event that JQuery is given to us to work with. I'm not going to go through everything, all the stuff that you can do working with events, but I just want you to be aware that when you register an event listener, so like we registered our function to fire on change, right? That JQuery passes that event object to us in our callback. And so if you just, like for me, if you just get it, whatever you call it, as long as you put an argument in here, it's going to be, you can work with your event object inside your code, inside your function. That's really, really handy. And then green.
So when that fires, the value of this would be the value of the div that, or the value of the checkbox? What is the value of this?
That's going to be the value of the checkbox. Let's see. Let's make sure. So there's our checkbox. And that's just because this is the context, because we selected our checkbox, because that's the element that we actually attach our event listener to, right? So next, file up. So let's see what this one has in store. So on this one, you can see that we added a little more in here on my event. So here's my show red on change. Here's my function. Here's the event that jQuery is going to pass to me. And then I do a little more here than just log it out to the console. What I've actually done is show and hide it. So the way I've done that, you can see simple if statement. If the element is checked, if that's true, then I go find all my divs with class red, and using CSS I change visibility to visible. If it's not true, I change visibility to hidden. Okay, so that's all we're doing is changing the CSS on these things. Little trick that's right here before what I actually checked. What I actually put in the value that I checked against true is a property of the actual DOM element. It's not a jQuery property, because I have the jQuery wrapper this, right? What's that? I could have just done this, huh?
Yeah, you could have done is, you could have done
I totally wanted to show this.
dot is, and then parentheses said, in quotes, he said just colon checked. Is checked. I'd have to type it out, I guess.
Okay.
But,
I just really wanted to show that you
You're-
can
you're-
reference the zero element of it from a jQuery object.
but you need to explain that when you do a jQuery selector, you get an array of objects, because otherwise the zero element doesn't make sense, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what, yeah, I was kind of hoping.
Yeah, when you do a selector, every jQuery selector period, even if you're selecting one thing, it gives you an array. Okay, but if you have one thing that is selected like an ID tag or something, then that might be just the first and only element of that array. But jQuery can select all of the red boxes if they all have like a common class or something, and it gives you an array of them. And so if you need to do something like a function that's only available to native JavaScript, then you need to do what he has right there after the if statement where he says the square brackets. He's basically, the this statement refers to the jQuery selector, right, and the jQuery collection that he got, right? Highlight where I'm talking about. After the this. Yeah, just the this part. Where he says, highlight it. Where he says that is the jQuery selector. That gives you an array of stuff. The zero is saying, I just want to get the first thing
element.
out of it because I know that I only selected one thing, and I want to get the first thing out of it, which is at the zero index of the array, right? And now you can start doing native JavaScript stuff to it. What I was telling him is actually that's not technically necessary because you don't need. He was thinking that the dot checked method that he's referencing there is available in native JavaScript, which it is. But you can say this dot is, and then in parentheses, and then go back and do single quotes. At the beginning of that, say semicolon checked. Colon checked. Not semicolon. And
Get rid of everything.
well, you still need to wrap the this in the jQuery selector.
Oh, okay, you're using the jQuery, okay.
Yeah, jQuery has a method called is. In other words, this thing that you have selected, the this variable, is it? And then you can have a selector after it that says, is it a, you could put a CSS selector like, is it a dot, I don't know, what's the class name like? Is it dot red? If you had a red class, that doesn't make hardly any sense. But if you had a class name, what are the class names for the red boxes?
Red.
Red?
Yeah, that
Just red? So,
Yeah.
okay, so I guess you could have a dot red there. Doing the colon checked is a pseudo selector. I guess you have to look up all the different options for pseudo selectors, but jQuery has more pseudo selectors available to you than CSS has. That's all.
Okay.
Do you want to explain a pseudo selector while you're?
Since we're on the rant,
Yeah.
I'm going to default to Joe. Why don't you explain the pseudo selector?
It's essentially a state selection in your CSS. So you're probably, if you do a lot of CSS, you're probably familiar with the hover pseudo selector. So if you hover over an element, it's going to apply such and such style. There's more than just hover. Checked is one of those. A lot of browsers won't allow you to do those in your CSS, but you can do them. jQuery observes a lot more pseudo selectors than your browser does as far as just straight CSS.
And it's also important to mention that jQuery has a selector engine called Sizzle that is not something that jQuery made up so much as they kind of help promote. It's made by the same guys, or are they completely different things?
I think it's a different thing.
It's a
I don't
different
think they
thing.
used to use Sizzle. Somebody else wrote it, and then they...
Yeah, they
No,
did.
Rezic started Sizzle. He
Oh,
worked
did
with
he?
Sizzle, yeah, prior to
Okay.
starting jQuery.
So when you do a normal
Oh.
CSS selector, your browser has a selector engine that knows how to traverse the DOM and figure out what you're trying to select. But when you're talking about JavaScript, you can't in JavaScript say, hey browser, here's a CSS selector, go get that stuff for me. JavaScript doesn't have that relationship with the browser where it'll do that for you, so you need your own selector, and native JavaScript only has .getElementById as a selector and a get element by class name. It has some very simple ones, but if you want to do some really exotic selectors, then the reason why you can do that in jQuery is because they have Sizzle, and Sizzle is a JavaScript written selector engine.
CSS selector, yeah.
Yeah.
So they wrapped all of those really long functions into nice, really short ones.
Yeah.
Or one really short one.
Yeah.
Just $1.
Is it really hot in here, or is it just my computer?
It's pretty warm. Yeah.
It's pretty
Close
warm.
it
Yeah.
down. Close the door, you gotta push that way down.
Well, let's just open the door.
Yeah,
No. We never keep the door shut. Say
Close
no.
up.
Yelling out there. Shut up. There was something. Yeah. Anyways, sorry, that's my
No, that's great, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just saying that I didn't even have to go through the wrapper, because my
Oh,
original
sure.
this
The original
native
this is
jQuery
native.
is native anyway, so I
Yeah.
just say this is checked, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, this checked is true, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of was just sneaking those in, because I just want to talk about that, because I think it's like, it comes in handy sometimes to be able to get a hold of your elements out, you know, after using jQuery to go find your elements.
Yeah, it does. And that's definitely like a gotcha of jQuery is you do this selector and you got this thing that you think you're working with, and then you think you can chain on a JavaScript method, and you can't. It'll say it's not there because you're speaking to the context of jQuery, and jQuery doesn't know how to chain on this native JavaScript function unless you go back to the native JavaScript. Does that make sense to you? I want to make sure that people get that, because I know that we're trying to do beginner stuff today.
So that leads us, then I just applied the same stuff to, let's see, just applied the same stuff to these, that's all.
I think one thing for newbies for that, how we were trying to, reference the first item in the array in order to switch from jQuery to native JavaScript. jQuery can pretty much do everything, all that kind of .check stuff, and I never do that because, jQuery pretty much has everything available to be able to, check it. Like Brad was saying, he gave the example of how to do it the jQuery way. And it's so easy to do that stuff in jQuery that sometimes it's harder to switch back and forth like that. And so, I don't know, I think sometimes just when you learn jQuery, it's easy to just stay in the jQuery world instead of switching back and forth unless there's a very good reason. But I rarely ever do, so I don't know if it's something that people want to try and wrap their head around at the beginning level, switching back and forth like that in the middle of your syntax like that can get kind of complicated, so.
But it also depends. I would agree with what you said in that context, but like .each or $.each is considered to be a much slower iterator than just using native JavaScripts if you're going to iterate through something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes people overuse jQuery jQuery has an abundance of things, but using it as a selector engine to manipulate DOM is really great. But if you're just going to do like a for loop, like the equivalent of JavaScript's for loop in jQuery, there's a $.each. You already had an example of that, right? $.each. Yeah, each.
Yeah.
And that's just a much slower iterator than using the for end that JavaScript provides natively.
Yeah, I think that's cool to stay totally in jQuery. I just tend to, because like a lot of times I'll use jQuery like really only for selection.
Yeah.
And then I'll write the rest of my code in native JavaScript. Once I get my elements, everything else I do is in native JavaScript sometimes. And so it's like, I think it just depends what,
Yeah.
what you're doing at the time. But
I think whatever you're more comfortable with, then too. If you already know native JavaScript, jQuery is what's new to you, then then you can do more native JavaScript stuff if that's what you're comfortable with. But yeah, I think the nuances of what's faster or what's not is probably more of the intermediate to advanced thing. Just do what's easier when you're a beginner.
What makes
Kinda
sense of
have to worry
commented.
about it, yeah.
Well, the next, let's see, the next one. I was just going for, I mean, pay everything. Any other questions right now before, I mean, I appreciate this, guys.
Are you gonna put this up on GitHub or something so we can review? I'm getting a lot of it in some of them.
It's, yeah, we'll make these links available. It's on JSBin, and you can look through it and, you know, step through and see some of the different stuff and change the code and stuff and see what it does. So for the next step in my code, you'll see I have my on change for my show red, my show blue on change, my show green on change. So then the next thing I did was just kind of was to fill out an on change for my make draggable checkbox, and then just wrote out some jQuery. I'm not going to go all the way through it right now for this. Just go through it kind of quickly. Let me see where to start. This is where, so for make draggable,
Yeah.
when it's draggable, when I click on pick up one of my divs, then I just wrote a little, I mean, it's just a little math to check, you know, how much the mouse has changed, and then I'm moving the div by the same amount that the mouse has changed from its position. If that makes sense? So, I also just changed the Z index while they're dragging, and then reset it, like after I put them down. That way they're on top while I'm dragging, but then when I put it down, it doesn't necessarily stay. Oh, those are, you know, see the red one. Yeah, see, it drops back under because I reset the Z index after I drop it. Then when they're not draggable, I take those events off. So I can't click on it and drag it now when it's not dragging. What the? It's not. Sorry, a little JS bin trouble for me here. Get back to it. Still the wrong one. Okay. So I'm just going to walk through real quick what I did. So we have our form input, our checkbox, on change, and check if it's true. And we've discussed there's several ways to do that. If it's checked, then I'm using my each iterator for all the divs that are inside of my container, just like in CSS. I just found my container ID, and then these are the descendants separated by a space, so all the divs that are inside there. So those are the elements I'm actually going to be acting on. Let's see what do I do here. I probably could have done some things better. This isn't the best. This isn't optimized. It's just to kind of demonstrate how some of it works. So with my divs, I attached a function to the mouse down event, and then events. I don't know if how familiar people are with events in the DOM, but there's a process called propagation where a child element will handle its event, and then it'll pass that event up to the parent element, and then that'll pass it up to the next parent element, and that's one type of propagation called bubbling, which is what I mostly deal with. I remember when Brad and I were talking about this, and he's like, "Are we going to mention propagate?" He asked me, "What's the other one?" And I was like, "I can't remember what it is because I don't even." Another one was from where it goes down the other way, from parent to child. But just the concept that an event's going to fire more than once, because it's going to fire for the event that actually fired, then it's going to fire again for its parent event, for its parent element, and for that parent element. Am I any experts want to help me out, or am I explaining propagation well enough, or of how that worked, that the event's going to fire for each element?
I'll explain it in the next one. That's definitely an event. Propagation and bubbling and stuff. I'll explain it going.
Okay.
I've never seen stop immediate propagation. Isn't it just stop propagation?
Good question. I've never used stop immediate propagation until this one.
Yeah.
And then stop propagation wasn't actually stopping it.
Oh.
And I had to use, because my mouse down events were firing 9 times, and that was making, when I moved my divs, it was making them fly off the page. So I used stop immediate propagation
I've never used that.
and then that stopped it. So I'm not sure. It just seems like it's a stronger stop to me so far.
It's like the importance
It's like
of
really
CSS.
stop. Yeah, I
This is
need
really
to
what I
stop
mean.
now.
Yeah.
It's worth exploring.
If I understand that correctly, it looks like it's going to stop any other child events as well, not just parent events. Anyway.
So yeah.
Bubbling up the DOM tree.
So sounds like Brad's going to cover propagation much more clearly in the next demo. So I just want to mention it because it's in here. It was kind of important to how this for this to work. So after we stop the bubbling, then I go ahead and move. I change my Z index. This is I'm still chaining here, just like I did on a single line. I just dropped them down to make it more readable. So I have my this, and then I change the CSS, change my Z index, and then on mouse move, I have my function. And the only reason I have my, I just named my event, because I'm doing here, since I have my on mouse down is registered inside of my on change. So for my first event listener, I have my event named E. For my next one, I just named it EE. So they're separate. So that I could still use the first one if I wanted to. So Oh, looks like I could have named that one with it. No, this is, let's see. Mouse down, yeah, it looks like I needed a third one. I think I overwrote that. So, we'll just say that one is how it works. There's my event. Change my, store my current offsets, and then some other stuff that checks it and does some subtraction and resets my my offsets based on the change. So you see my change there and my change there. And then on mouse up, I go ahead and release everything by, so I have my this off, mouse move, and go ahead and put my Z index back. And if this is my else, if make draggable is not checked, then I go ahead and remove everything, because I'm not even going to have my mouse down event. So then that nothing occurs. I'll show it to you. So when I check this, that enables that my mouse down event is going to work. So when my mouse down event works, then it's going to give me my mouse move event and run the math and reset my offset on my div. And then when I uncheck that, I took all my events off. So now my events don't work. So, how does that sound to everybody?
Cool.
Yeah?
Yay.
Cool. So I'll let you, yeah, this will be up on, this is up on JSBin. We'll make that available if you want to walk through that, a little, if you want to look at it. It's like I said, but it's not the best way to do it, I guarantee. But it works, Let's see. So the next thing, that's kind of all the code for this. The next thing I was going to show you is just like, I took all that code and put it into a plugin so that we can, I can show you how simple things are, how to just use a plugin and attach that to an element and then it'll be done. But before I do that, I'm going to backtrack because I realized it's kind of a huge thing that I didn't talk about. But it's cool, it's still relevant with the plugin, so I think that's good. Everything that I've been doing has been in this function, has been inside of the document ready function, and the callback that we passed to document ready. I've seen some discussion lately, last year, that you don't need to use doc ready anymore. I know there's other ways. I still just use document ready all the time. What ready does is it just doesn't execute any of this, anything that you've written in your callback until the DOM is fully loaded. And that way you're not trying to execute any JQuery functions on elements that don't even exist yet. Because, that was a stickier situation prior, with just native JavaScript many years ago. So this doc ready makes it really easy to know. You know for certain that your page is going to be loaded. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I always see it, as document ready. But a couple of months ago, I did a lynda.com jQuery tutorial, and he just kept stating over and over again, and it was from like 2011. He just kept saying over and over again that document ready is like the default state, so you don't have to call it. But I still see it everywhere.
I still use it a lot because it just makes sense to me in my head. I've read David Flanagan, who writes the definitive guide to JavaScript, and he also writes a jQuery pocket guide. I know in the latest edition of Pocket Guide, he says you don't have to use document ready, and there's another way to do it. You could just use an anonymous function. I think maybe pass it the jQuery object or something like that. But
yeah, that's the The default in jQuery, in the jQuery object is if you pass in a function, it will execute that function on document ready.
Okay.
So you don't need that first statement.
You
the
just
document
pass it
ready
into dollar function, you just pass a function into the dollar
part. Yeah.
function, okay.
Yep.
Okay. I just have still continued, I know I've seen that, and I've seen it in kind of different ways of people's code, like, so I'm just like, you know what, I'm using document ready. Because it makes sense to me, and I put document ready at the bottom of my page, and,
It's like, kind of like commenting.
yeah.
Without commenting it out.
Yeah. So, when I show you the plugin, what we'll do is, we ordinarily, you bring in jQuery, and then you have another script tag to bring in your plugin file, and then you fire your plugin, either inside document ready or inside the wrapper, inside the wrapper function. So, however you're going to use your document ready. So then I'll show that to you.